Hi there, my name's Andy Curry. I'm not, as advertised, Paul Cook. That's our principal consultant. He was going to be doing the talk today. Unfortunately, he's poorly at home in bed. Luckily, we're largely a remote organization internally, so I haven't been in a room with him for weeks. So I'm fine. We're all fine. Everything's good. I'm the User Experience Director of LION+MASON. I'm going to talk to you today about how user experience design can help shape better FinTech. First of all, a little bit about us. Who are LION+MASON? Well, we've got a standout front if you want to come and have a chat with us after, but we're a product design and user experience agency. What we do is we work with organizations to understand their users, to conduct research, analysis, and start using that understanding of users to feed into designing products that genuinely work and genuinely deliver results. And we do that for a wide variety of different organizations. So we do finance, of course, but we also do work in pharma, we work in education, we work in government departments, we work in aerospace. Harley Davidson is up there. We're pretty much everyone. We're agnostic as to the industry that this can be applied to. So, now when we were asked to speak at this event, Paul sent round a message and said, okay, so what should we do? What shall I talk about? And a lot of recommendations came back. Some of those recommendations were that we should get some kind of prominent FinTech examples. We should put them up on the screen, and we should start going through them. Do a bit of a UX audit. Start saying what works, what doesn't work, what would we change or recommend, which might be an interesting activity. But actually, I think it kind of misrepresents what user experience truly is about. Because behind every one of those designs, every design that works, there's a number of things. There is needs. A design should be created to meet a need. And a problem. A design should be created to solve a problem. So what do those two things have in common? That's people. So it's people that I'm going to talk to you today about. And it's people that I'm kind of really most interested in what we do. People are the nub of every kind of product or every kind of service. It's about people's needs. It's about people's problems. And if you ignore the needs and the problems of people in the process of designing a new service or the process of designing a new product, it's very, very, very hard to start injecting that type of thing in at the end. Okay? Now, you can have the most beautiful designs in the world. They might look super cool, and they might be amazing. But if they don't meet needs or problems, the minute you put people into that equation, that's where the chaos kind of starts. Because one thing I can guarantee you about people is that people don't necessarily act how you hope or expect them to. There's a good picture that kind of illustrates this point. So what we have here is we have a gate, and we have the actual path that people are taking around it. The designed experience and the actual reality. A lot of people coming up to that gate thinking, don't really fancy that. Skirt around it. And that happens an awful lot in any sort of industry. So how do we avoid this? Now, there's a phrase called user-centered design. It's kind of the heart of what we actually do and how we approach things. You may have heard of it. You may practice it within your organizations. For those of you that you don't, I'm going to just quickly run through what user-centered design means. So essentially, it's all, at the heart of it is people, your users. And those could be internal users or they could be external customers. Don't just think this is just about customers. This is also about internal users too. But it's about understanding who those people are, understanding who they are, understanding their needs, understanding their problems, understanding the context in which they might engage with your product or service. So where are they? Literally, where are they in some cases? What are they using? And taking all of that understanding and all of that insight into who these people are and using that to feed the design, okay? Now, what we have seen and what we do see is that in many organizations, the actual importance that's placed upon users' needs, problems, who the true users are, is actually not nearly as big as we'd probably suggest it should be. And in some cases, doesn't exist at all. And actually, there are a number of other areas that are actually driving design, driving decision-making and strategy. A number of aspects, such as, firstly, competition, looking at your competition, that kind of curtain twitching that some organizations do, where they look at what their competitors are doing, saying, well, what have they got in there up there? What have they got there? We've got to have that in ours, regardless of whether or not they have actually got the same strategy or they've got the same customers or they've got the same purposes, whatever, that kind of sense that you've got to keep up with the Joneses, okay? There's another aspect, which is this kind of contrary attitude that seems to come out, and it's kind of born out of this desire to disrupt, which is, not a bad thing in of itself, but if it's done for the sake of disruption, And we often see that, this idea that where everyone else zigs, we zag, yeah. That's often a huge driver within organizations to actually what they should do and the products and services that they produce. And also technology. And again, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with certain types of technology, but what I'm saying is that there is a number of pressures, a number of organizations that we see, they're developing new products and new services based on the fact that they can do it with that technology. Someone coming to us and saying, okay, listen, could you come and help us? What can we do with augmented reality? I don't know, what problems are you trying to solve? What problems does augmented reality solve? Those questions, those pressures come up in a lot of organizations. You may be kind of thinking, actually, maybe that happens in ours sometimes too. But what happens is that when you take away or when you reduce the importance of actually what are the problems you're trying to solve, what do your users truly need, and you start crowding it with a lot of these other pressures within your organization, when that starts feeding into design, actually the problem is it's less about users and their needs and wants and problems and contexts feeding design decisions, and it becomes the other way around. You're actually designing something, and then you're kind of just pushing it out on users and hoping and expecting that they will bend to your will, that they will pick it up and they will do what you want them to. And as we've already discussed, people don't really ever do what you want them to unless it suits them. Okay, now I'm going to use a real-world example for this one. Okay, this is something we found. Okay, we're just going to go through this. This is a smart fridge. Now, apologies to anybody in this room who's got a smart fridge, but I thought that this was just quite a nice way of kind of crystallizing how this can kind of go sometimes. So what we have here is a smart fridge. But this isn't just any smart fridge. This is the RF 9000 Family Hub French-style fridge freezer with beverage center, trademark. Now, this is a real product. It's on the Samsung website. Well, the next few slides are directly from the Samsung website. This goes for a cool £2,869. Now, that's a lot of money, you might think. What do I get for that? Well, let me tell you. Here's some of the functions. Easily stay in touch with all the family. So, if you can't bring yourself to actually engage with the members of your household from within your own house, you can use your fridge. But wait, you must think, there's more. Yes, there is more. Now, this fridge comes equipped with cameras inside it, right? And we've all been there. You get home from a hard day at work, and you can barely bring yourself to muster up the energy to open your own fridge door. Well, fine. You can swipe on the front, and the screen will show you a live feed of what's going on inside your own fridge. Oh, yes. But wait, you say, there must be more. There is more. Watch TV whilst you cook. Right, now there's a lot going on in this picture, so let's unpick it for a little bit here. Okay, so what have we got here? We've got a lady, she's cooking a meal, she's got a thick chopping board there in front of her, what I presume is a very sharp knife. She's already made short work of a red onion there. She's starting on something else. She's half a glass of wine down. And she's leaning over her shoulder watching Peaky Blinders. Now, I'm not an expert, but that doesn't seem like a glowing health and safety recommendation to me. And actually, if I'm completely honest, I'm not 100% sure that some of the features that are on this fridge have necessarily been developed from a perspective of what does the user want, need, and what is the context in which they are actually doing this. Okay, so anyway, what's any of this got to do with FinTech, you might ask, which isn't a completely fair question, considering where we are. FinTech, and actually a lot of tech organizations, have various different kind of aspects that we've noticed. This is not true of all, but many of them are under various different pressures that can kind of lead them to be susceptible to some of the kind of problems, some of the kind of design pressures that we've talked about. And that is this pressure to grow quickly, this pressure to disrupt and differentiate, this pressure to attract investment and investment fast, and this pressure to embrace new technology, regardless of whether it's the actual true purpose. Okay, that's true of a lot of organizations. But there can be risks, and they can lead to problems in terms of actually designing products that truly work. So how do you avoid these traps? Okay, well, there's a few steps. that you can take, and this is this user-centered design thing. I'm going to quickly run through the various different steps we would typically take. This is a bit of a whistle-stop tour, so you can come and talk to us if you want to know any more detail about this. But these are things that anyone can do, any organization can do. Okay, first of all, you think about your users. How do we understand our users? First of all, decide who are they? Dead simple. Okay. How do you find them? Well, how do you actually get access to these users? So you can then generate insight with those users, and then how do you make sense of that insight? We're just going to go through this. It's a really straightforward kind of process, but we're going to go through this in a few details, and I'll talk about a little bit about some of our thoughts on that. So who are they? Okay, now there's many ways to identify users. There's many ways to start kind of building up profiles of users. There are actually, certainly when you go into marketing research or anything like that, you start talking about demographics, geography, psychographics, behavioral. There are loads of different kind of elements inside each of those. You could start choosing the ones you feel apply to your users. You could go in and kind of get some data and start investigating in great detail. You could take all that data, slam it into a complex user persona in which you're even pulling things like brand preference, personality types, and start really going to town with that. Create a few of those. Those customers, you then can start placing them around on a matrix, section, value matrix, if you will, or many other sorts of things. You can get even more complex than that if you want. You could start tracking how those customers then might evolve and their needs might evolve over time. But actually, in many ways, we find actually that a lot of people stop and just going to say, well, I just want to get an idea off the ground. Now, this seems like an awful lot of hassle. So, in my experience, if you're trying to get an idea off the ground, you're trying to just see what can work and start developing something quickly. You don't have to necessarily do all of that. There's some value in that. I'm not saying there isn't, but you can start from somewhere simpler. And that is essentially, take a basic scenario and build your persona on that. Okay, so you think of a scenario for a user, and you think of what makes my life easy for that user and what makes my life hard. Those three columns, fill them in. So for example, I'm a young person wanting to spend less and save more. I'm aged between 18 and 30. I'm financially independent. Great. What makes my life easier? Well, tell me when better interest rates are available. And short, snappy explanations. I don't have time to read much. What makes my life hard? Long-winded application forms, not being able to do stuff on my phone. Okay, stick a picture on it and you're done. You've got a basic persona that's good enough to start going away and investigating with. Create a few more of those, and you've got three personas, okay? And you could take these as your hypothetical users at this stage and start thinking, okay, let's go away and investigate about them. One thing to note at this point is, it's a really good point in the process to start saying, okay, what is the ceiling for ability and use and accessibility requirement at this stage? So if some of your users, think about who is going to have the most potentially restrictive technical ability, the most potentially kind of significant accessibility requirements, and various other kinds of requirements that are going to impact their ability to use a service or a product. Identify who those people are. That's your ceiling for design immediately. That's the person for whom the design has to work. Otherwise, you are running a huge risk of just not even being able to touch a huge swathe of your audience. And it's important to remember, when I talk about accessibility, I'm not just talking about people who have permanent disabilities or anything like that. I'm talking about anybody, because any single person in this room could have an accessibility requirement tomorrow. Accessibility could be a deterioration of your eyesight. It could be you've broken your arm. It could be anything. You have to consider that the accessibility requirement isn't just some sort of like add-on or a niche element. It should be a fundamental requirement of every design process. And actually, in my experience, if you design something to be truly accessible, well, then it will work equally, amazingly, for everybody else. It's a really great approach to taking to make a design that works for everybody and not excluding a whole segment and then potentially a very important segment of your prospective market. So anyway, you've got your users, you've thought about your technical, but your design baselines. How do you go out and find them? You want to go out and find them to speak to these people. So what you're looking for is a cross-section of the general population. Okay, so you've got your general population, you're looking for a kind of sample size from within that general population. Now, one thing that a lot of organizations will do is they will go to, say, a marketing recruitment company, and they'll start kind of getting users from their pool of people, or a user recruitment company. And they'll say, okay, just give me 70 users of this particular type. That's fine. Do remember, though, that when you go to those bodies, you're not necessarily getting a cross-section of the population. You are, in many cases, getting a cross-section of their recruitment database. And bear in mind, who is in their recruitment database? Their recruitment database is made up of people who signed up to be in their recruitment database. Now, you can make a few assumptions about people like that. I'm not going to go that far. But look at it in a different way. If you wanted to find out what the opinion of the man on the street was, you could write about a certain subject. You write some questions on a questionnaire, you stick it on a clipboard, and then you go walking down the high street and you stop people and you start talking to them about things. You get some answers. You get home and you get your clipboard and you say, okay, here, I have some valuable insight about the opinions of the man on the street on this subject. Or do you? Or do you, in fact, have valuable opinions about the man on the street who is likely to stop for somebody with a clipboard about that subject? Now, people who stop for people on the street with a clipboard, in my experience again, quite different types of people from the man on the street necessarily. And I'm kind of being a little bit kind of silly about this, but actually what I mean is that you want to really try to think about are we getting genuinely an accurate representation of who our true users are? Okay, so if that's maybe a challenge, how do you do it? There's lots of different ways, but actually some cases it's a case of going out and finding them. But there are great ways of going out and finding these true people. There's community groups, both physical and online. You know, if you have a specialist type of user that you want to go and speak to, start looking for online groups, online communities for those people, and start asking people there if they'd like to come and speak to you about something. If you've got a specific industry or a specific type of employee in mind, such as a bank worker, go and speak to banks and say, can I speak to some of your employees? You know, if you wanted to go and find out about people's behaviors when it comes to train travel, you'd go and stand on a train station and talk to people. That also has the added benefit of allowing you to actually do a field visit in the place where likely your product or service might be used. Always do that. Always try and at least get as many people as you can to actually go and physically experience the space in which someone's going to use your product or service, because it's mind-blowingly eye-opening. But go direct to people, is what we're saying. And friends and family is up there. Now, best practice suggests that maybe you shouldn't just go and test ideas and concepts with friends and family, because they'll be nice to you and they won't want to hurt your feelings. Actually, unless, of course, you're going to go and ask your mum, in which case, yes, you'd probably say, very nice, dear. If you go and asking friends and family can actually result in some really quick turnaround, kind of guerrilla-style feedback, and they can be phenomenally blunt with you. I know from bitter experience. But actually, that can be actually a very effective way of starting to move things along and do things quickly and in a very agile way when it comes to getting user responses, as long as they fit the profile. So anyway, we've defined who people are, we've found them. How do you actually generate insight? So there's two kind of groups, two kind of approaches to generating insight. We've got fact-finding, we've got concept testing. So we'll go with fact-finding first. These are quite broad. There's lots of other different niches inside, but really they're the core two. Fact-finding is where you actually want to go out and speak to users about their needs and identify problems that they may have, start kind of doing that discovery style of research to understand things, understand their attitudes towards particular issues. Now, one of the key ways that's often done in terms of fact-finding is focus groups. We've seen it done very commonly. Get 5 people into a room and a facilitator and have them have a discussion about that subject. And they can be fine, but there is, again, we're going to kind of like err on the side of caution. There's words of warning about focus groups. They can very, very easily get wildly derailed. And I've sat in on these sessions and in some cases facilitated, and they can very easily go very badly wrong. Just to give you a bit of an example, you know, usually you've got an alpha in the room in a focus group. There's almost always one. And it's this person that says, I'm important, people value what I have to say. I'm going to talk until someone stops me. Now, if it gets really fun, then you often have a second alpha in the room as well. And they say, he's talking a lot, but I'm also important. I'm going to stop talking and stop him from dominating the room. Now, already, what you've got is, you've got people in the room, they're supposed to be discussing an actual issue, but in fact, what you've got is a small psychodrama starting to build up in that very confined space. You get a third person that says, these two seem like complete idiots. I'm going to say something controversial to wind them up. And suddenly, you've got a bit more needle coming in here, and suddenly the controversy, kind of the psychodrama builds. Number 4, my boss told me to come to this. I get the day off work. It's not worth me getting involved. Number 5, I can't believe I got paid to do this. It doesn't even matter if I speak. The facilitator looks ready to go home. And as you can see, the outputs of this aren't necessarily directly going to be as authentic as you might hope they might be. And companies use this insight to make decisions about product strategy. So, there's another approach. And this approach we always try and use, and we always try and recommend to people, is actually speak one-on-one to people if you can. Really, really, really speak one-on-one. Workshops do have their place. I'm being a little facetious with that one, but workshops do have their place, but if they're done in the right way and they're done for the right purposes. But if you truly want to know what people feel like, speak to a number of people individually and then start collating the findings of all of that. And survey is often a technique that people pull out because they can blast it to thousands of people, they can get data back. But survey, again, has its limitations in that you can't follow up. So, for example, if we wanted to do a survey, say, do you go to the gym? Yes. How often do you go? 3 times a week. Boom. Okay, so we've got a bit of insight. We've got this particular user in mind. He's a bit of a gym bunny, goes 3 times a week. Okay. But the problem with a survey is you can't follow up any questions. You can't pull at threads. And sometimes the actual response that you'll get from a survey will paint one very different picture of a person from what you'll get when you actually are able to speak to them in person. So if you were to follow up this with an actual interview, when do you go? Oh, I go Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. It's Wednesday tonight. Are you going tonight? I struggle tonight. I've got to run some errands. Okay, but you're going to go on Friday. No, not this Friday. I'm out this Friday, yeah. Okay, so you're going to go extra days next week to make up for it? Nah. In 4 more questions, we've turned this particular type of user from being someone who goes 3 times a week to someone who has a gym membership, maybe probably doesn't use it very often. It's an example to illustrate the point, but in interviews, you can pull at those threads, you can start getting to the substance beneath, you start seeing this reality. And you don't have to conduct 1,000 interviews, it's not like that, it's qualitative research. So you can actually conduct a far smaller sample size. You speak to 10, 12 people, and you've actually, of the same user type, and then actually suddenly you've got insight, you can start seeing correlations and patterns within, and you can start acting on that insight in a much more effective way. So that's fact-finding. Concept testing, again, is really straightforward. This is the idea that if you've got a concept in mind, if you have an idea for a product and you want to go and validate whether or not it's something that will have uptake, see what people's response is to, see if it's fitting the need. Again, a great thing to do. Go and test that concept. Don't describe it to people and expect them to understand it. And again, it seems an odd thing to say, but I've seen it happen. Some people just saying, we're going to tell you what our concept is, we're going to verbally describe it to you, or we're going to give you a piece of writing about literal prose I've seen put in front of people. That describes what we're thinking about doing. What do you think about that? Just don't do that. It's expecting a user to basically read that or hear that and then build a picture in their mind of what you're thinking, and you're hoping that the picture in their mind is the same as the picture in your mind, and then if you try and do that across 12 people, suddenly you've got responses, but they're not about your concept. They're about 12 totally different concepts that have all been created from people's minds. So it's very simple. Do a picture, do a concept, do a prototype. That doesn't have to be complicated either. They can be simple block wireframe prototypes, really rough, really quick to do, and just get something visual out there in front of people and test it. So again, making sense of it. We're nearly done. Focus tasks, like I said, so you're testing your prototype or you're talking to people about things. Make sure that the tasks aren't just kind of generic things where people are going to give these kind of generally vague, yeah, it's great kind of responses, but actually are specific tasks. If you're going in to test a particular product, can you find the ISA product information? Is anything missing? Get specific types of questions, focused questioning on that, and watch what people are doing, if you can. If you can. You can do interviews over the phone, you can do testing sessions remotely, but actually try and observe both the person that you're testing with and also their screen. Because there is so many situations I've been in where you have a test running and even if you're just watching the screen, then afterwards you say to the person, okay, so how did that go? And they say, oh yeah, it's great. Really good, yeah, really intuitive. I really felt good about it. Yeah, it's a great system. And you think to yourself, okay, that's great stuff. Because I remember you during the test, you were literally sweating buckets, eyeballs were popping out. At one point, you dropped your mouse off the desk. You were clicking all over the screen in completely the wrong place. Obviously, I didn't say that to them. But still, the point stands. It literally has happened so many times that people will tell you, "Oh, it was great, and I really like it," and you can physically see them having a negative response to it in so many cases. But actually, just watching what people do is fascinating, and it helps you and teaches you so much, both their physicality, but also what they're doing with any kind of prototype or mock-up that you've got. And capture that feedback in a systematic way. Make sure you're just asking the same things of different users, because then it's very easy. You don't end up with a kind of sort of vague word cloud of suggested kind of ideas of, yeah, most people felt that it was a bit like this and a bit like this, which is vague and very hard to make any design decisions based on. What you end up with is kind of very systematic, user 1 did this with this task, user 2 did this, user 3 did this. Start doing that at some sort of scale, and you can start saying, okay, we see patterns emerging. And you can even start quantifying it. It's a qualitative exercise, but you can start quantifying it. You can start putting numbers at the end of this. 78% of people completed task 4 easily. Well, that's telling us something. And that's data that you can take forward and use in design decision-making and strategy decision-making. So focus tasks or questions, watch what users are doing, capture systematic feedback. And after all of that circle, you've completed the game. You've got insight from real users that's going to give you massively useful decision-making data that you can then take in and use in your design decision-making and your product development strategy. And it can give you confidence in what you're going forward with. It can mitigate a huge amount of risk that's involved in developing something. Because if you're confident that you've spoken to who your true users are, and you've done it in the right way, and you've got the insight that you require, and you're making design decisions based on that, then your end product is far, far more likely to be able to actually meet their needs and solve their problems. Can you achieve guaranteed certainty? Of course not. And anybody that says they can is lying. Outside of you being a monopoly or a dictatorial state, I can't imagine a situation in which you can actually guarantee that something is going to be used when it goes out the door. But it's about making sure that you are at least giving yourself the chance to have the best approach to those people by solving their problems and solving their needs and creating a product or service that's going to resonate. To basically go away, try and step a little away from this design leading the being thrust upon users approach to actually making your users' needs and wants and problems inform what your design is. And trying to avoid some sort of gigantic, monolithic smart fridge situation. I'm Andy Curry, thank you very much indeed. The end. Thank you.
So the one name we all know is correct is Paul, even though your real name is Andy. And not Steve, Julian. I'll pay you back for that one. Do we have any questions from the audience at all? If you don't, then I have one. Yep, there's one here.
Hi there. My name's Andy McElroy at Sandpiper Consulting. I've probably spent more years than I care to remember working in customer-led transformation and change, both in operational and digital spaces. And a lot of this really resonates with me, but one of the areas I've focused strongly on with a lot of clients is a lot of information that they have already within their gift to analyze, but is untapped. And a lot of that is through their telephony recordings and the kind of messages that they're getting through their customers, telling them what they're ringing for, what the purpose of the call is, and breaking that down into identifying the kind of problems that the customers are experiencing. You know those kind of calls that you get where the customer's saying, what's happening with my mortgage application? Why wasn't the documentation that I sent through to you suitable? Those sort of things. And there's this massive pool of data that quite often businesses are not tapping into. And where this applies, particularly in the digital world, is when people drop out the digital channel and into other channels like telephony or branch. And what started out as a sort of a value demand journey, let's say, where they were wanting to do something in the digital space, suddenly they're having to get on the phone, wait in a queue, and talk to an advisor because they haven't been able to do it. Now, I try and work with a lot of companies tapping into that pool of data and pulling out the insights that you find in them. And that sort of feeds into your sort of analysis of needs and problems. And I was just wondering, what's your sort of view on that data and how you can surface what a business already has within its gift to analyze?
Yeah, I mean, one area of the, in the talk, obviously it's a whistle-stop tour. First of all, I agree with you. Customer services logs are gold mines, absolute gold mines, and frequently completely overlooked. Likewise, people on a design and product team actually sitting on customer services calls in related areas and listening in, doing ride-alongs, valuable, really, really valuable, because actually also it's important for people to actually hear customers. And I don't just mean designers. I mean developers. I mean product owners. I mean, people at senior figures. Get as many people if they can just listen to a call from the customer services line. That's hugely valuable. But data is, and the data that you can take, and existing data, and the data you can actually go away and collect is really valuable in terms of this process as well. I'm not saying that it's just about qualitative research. Quantitative research that you can collect and use is also very valuable in this. And that can include things like analytics and such. What you need to bear in mind is that when you're talking about anything that's a quantitative kind of data source, such as analytics, is it can tell you what people are doing to a certain extent. It can't necessarily tell you why. And why is the real nub of it. Customer services logs are really, really useful because actually they show you the people and they highlight the very real problems. What they also serve to do is by seeing people's thoughts, they help you empathize with those users. And then the end user is not just a number and not just some analogous kind of persona, but they become a real person. And I think that's hugely valuable for a product team to actually have that exposure and start thinking about people as genuine human beings. Sorry, did that answer your question? Okay, cool.
I think there is another question, but I'm afraid I think I'll have to leave it. The irony of somebody who does customer experience and product design not leaving enough time for questions from the audience is not lost on me. But thank you very much indeed for your time today. And I think we should all go to lunch now because we have an hour to kill and back here by just after 1 o'clock, please. Thank you so much indeed for filling up. Thank you.